Hello and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, where we're trying to solve the mystery of August 16th, 1977. And we're following our fictional Memphis Elvis fan, Joyce, as she sifts through all the evidence that's available from the radio, the television, the newspapers, and special evidence that the Elvis network of fans continues to bring her. In yesterday's episode, we learned that Caroline Kennedy had come up to view Elvis somewhere around 10 p.m. on August the 17th, the day after he passed away. Hi, Chillin'. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here too. And we learned that Vernon did not know that Caroline was there to write a story for a newspaper, that he didn't know she was there as a journalist. He believed she was there as a representative of the Kennedys. And when he found out later, he wasn't happy about it. Hi, Marion. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here too. Hi, Anna. Good to see you. Appreciate seeing you here. Hi, Colleen. Good to see you here too. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for coming. I think you guys are going to enjoy what I've got to tell you today and to show you. So in today's video, we're going to go over Bitsy Mott and Barron Hilton, two people who were connected to Elvis that probably a lot of Elvis fans don't recognize their names immediately. But before we get there, you know, the way that we're going to get there is Joyce has yet more Elvis friends show up, and they brought yet more pictures, and they brought some newspapers that her news agent wasn't able to get a hold of. And so that's where we're going to start today, with some pictures. And here's one that is a picture of a letter along with a couple of cufflinks. And you can see that, well, you may not be able to read this very well on the screen, so I'll read it for you. But it says, taking care of business on the letterhead, and Vernon Presley. So it's Vernon Presley's personal taking care of business letterhead. And it's dated June the 7th, 1977. So this is just 2 months before Elvis passes away. Just slightly more than 2 months before. And it says, I, Vernon Presley, do attest that this set of cufflinks once belonged to my son, Elvis Presley. All of us here at Graceland thank you for all you do for the community. Sincerely, Vernon Presley. And he signed it. And his thank you was in all capital letters. All of us here at Graceland thank you for all you do for the community. Now, I don't know who he sent these cufflinks to, but in a previous episode, we looked at a pool ball, a number 6 pool ball, and it was from the Graceland pool table. And we wondered, how did that ball roll away from Graceland all by itself? So the immediate speculation on our part is that people were pocketing these items and then walking out of Graceland. But not every item that left Graceland was part of a theft. Not every item that left Graceland was not supposed to leave Graceland. There are items that were constantly leaving Graceland that Vernon and Elvis had agreed upon. And this is also one of the reasons that Vernon is considered to be such a hoarder. So you hear that he saved every little bit of everything. And it said it kind of to make fun of him a little bit, that because of the way that we see hoarders in today's society, that he would save everything thinking that maybe possibly it could be useful at some point in the future, when we in today's disposable society know that nothing's going to be able to be saved for the use in the future, because it will have deteriorated and rotted away by then. But back then, that's not the way things were. They used to build things to last, and you've probably heard that expression. And if you don't really understand what it means that when they built the Model T Fords, those cars are still around. There are still Model T Fords that are running, and they, compared to the amount of maintenance that you had to put into a current vehicle, and the fact that after about 10 or 12 years now, current vehicles really are not drivable anymore, these Model Ts were something else, and they built everything in the society that way. So when Vernon held on to stuff, it really might be useful in the future, but more importantly, it was attached to Elvis, and he knew that. And they were constantly sending these little pieces out as donations. And then people would auction off these donations, and then Elvis's value attached to the item would be realized in actual dollars that would then go to a good cause that Elvis approved of. So if you've seen my video about Elvis and the American Heart Association and the very last concert that he gave in Las Vegas, and he had raised a bunch of money, and then he gave donations of personal items to be auctioned off, this is exactly the same thing, but it was going on behind the scenes all the time. Just didn't see it. But here's a letter. Here's the cufflinks. And we don't know who they went to, but we've got a date on it. And Pat's saying, how amazing. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that you see what I see in this, the generosity of Elvis as reflected through Vernon's letter and in this gift. And Terry saying so cool, and Colleen saying the fans are very happy that Vernon kept everything. That's right. And so is Angie Marchese. And Pat saying that everything that Elvis had, has its history and is history. I agree with that. And Marion saying that today Vernon's collection is helping to put the puzzle together. That's right. Now, this wasn't part of the collection. It was sent away from the collection, but it was sent out there into the world to do good. And it's made money multiple times because these pieces have again appeared upon the auction circuit. But let's look at another picture that they brought. And this is another set of cufflinks with another Vernon Presley taking care of business letterhead letter. And this one says, I, Vernon Presley, donate this great pair of letter and cufflinks and tie clasp. So I think he's saying that it's got a letter E on it, each of the cufflinks, as well as the tie clip. I don't have a picture of the clip, just the cufflinks. These were owned and worn by my son, Elvis Presley. Thank you from all of us here at Graceland. Sincerely, Vernon Presley. So we have no date on this one. We don't know when it was given or to whom. But this is yet another token of appreciation, probably for an auction for charity that Vernon has sent out. So this, again, verifies that this was a normal course of events, and it wasn't just cufflinks, but I just happened to choose cufflinks to try to, help bring this point across. And let's look at one more. And we've got yet another pair of cufflinks. And this time we've got the tie clip. And it is also on taking care of business letterhead, but this one says Elvis. So it doesn't say Vernon Presley. It says Elvis. But it's from Vernon. And it says, I, Vernon Presley, donate these great cufflinks and money clip set. We attest that this set was owned and worn by my son Elvis. And we are honored to pass down this item. Sincerely, Vernon Presley. So again, I believe he sent these to either a super fan or someone looking for a donation for charity, something like that. And I don't know, he may have even sent these after Elvis passed away. We don't know. But it just indicates again, there was a lot of charity going on that we don't know anything about, but it's still reflected out there in the world if we just look for it. And Marion's asking, what did they do with the cufflinks? All 3 sets of these cufflinks were from the auction circuit, so somebody's purchased these and they're in a private collection somewhere. And then Wanda McDonald. Hi, Wanda. Thank you so much for coming. I don't think I've seen you in a live stream before, so welcome. Definitely enjoy seeing you here. Hi, Hillbilly Cat. I just found your channel. My son is Elvis's 3rd cousin, 3 or 4 times removed. He is related through Minnie Mae, who was born a Hood. Yes, I agree. She was. Last name, and that's my son's last name. That's fascinating, Wanda. Hopefully we get to all hear a little bit more about that. I appreciate you coming and sharing that with us. And Terry saying that it's a pleasure to have a relation of Elvis in this chat. And Wanda, be sure to check out Elvis History. That's Terry. He runs another channel. He's got a lot of great videos, and a few of them, they dovetail into mine. So you get to learn about, kind of the same thing from a lot of different angles. And then want to say that she's not the relation, but her son is, and his dad is the link. And we didn't know until after Lisa Marie passed away, and you were doing some genealogy and found it. Wow, that's fascinating. So let's take a look. At this next picture I have. This is Bitsy Mott. Okay, so you can see Elvis. So the other guy, that's Bitsy Mott. He was the Colonel's brother-in-law. Colonel had a wife, married her, lived in Florida with her, and that's where Bitsy was. And Bitsy was a teenager when Colonel got married to Marie, Bitsy's sister. And I believe Marie had been married before, and so this was her second marriage, but Bitsy was a young feller, just coming into about 18 years of age. And because of the war, World War II, he got a chance. He was a minor league baseball player, and he got to play major leagues for one season. And of course, that was the highlight of his professional career as a baseball player. But although he was a short man, you can see he's a little bit heavy, he's a little bit thick. He was a strong guy. And the Colonel used him as security and logistics. So when Elvis was first with the Colonel in the late 50s, Bitsy would do a lot of the setups at the hotels and stuff for the switchboards, and make sure that the security up to getting upstairs was in place, so that you couldn't just walk up and walk to Elvis's room. Not nearly to the point that it was in the 70s when they did it, but Bitsy kind of set all that up. And then he took the job over again in 1960 when Elvis returned. And the Colonel kind of had a showdown at one point with the guys who he felt weren't doing anything and causing a lot of ruckuses, because he was paying Bitsy to do all these logistics and make sure that the phones were working and make sure Elvis was in place on time and get the driving done and all these other pieces that he felt some of these guys could jump in and help with. And that's all in a letter that the Colonel wrote in 1960. But that's who Bitsy Mott is. And we're going to look at something that he said after Elvis passed away. And Wanda's saying that she doesn't understand to this day why her son's grandparents didn't, or his, her husband's grandparents or son's fathers grandparents didn't tell him that he was related to Elvis on the side that was from Tupelo. And that Wanda, when she found out, woke her son up and told him she was so excited about it. And he didn't believe it at first, and she had to pull the genealogy up and show him. And so that is pretty exciting. I'd be very excited about that too. So I'm going to read to you guys an article that I have that came out of Florida. And so one of these fans has brought this to Joyce along with those other pictures we just looked at. And it's a newspaper from Florida, and just one that her news agent didn't get a hold of. But that's where Bitsy's from, so they, of course, contacted him. He hadn't been with Elvis since like 1975. So he had been away from the center even longer than like Red and Sonny and Dave. But he was never exactly at the center either, because he was directly employed by the colonel. But he did travel with them a lot, and he was often in the same car. He was a little bit older, so he wouldn't have been quite as approachable to them as themselves, like the band members, Scotty and Bill, and Red when he was driving in that period, or anybody else that Elvis had accompanying them. So he would have been more like Tom Diskin, somebody that was there to help keep order and keep everybody in line and keep the money flowing and make sure that everybody got to the right place at the right time. And so this is out of Tampa, Florida. And it says, when E.M. Bitsy Mott, because Bitsy is his nickname, E.M. Bitsy Mott started working for Elvis, the future rock and roll king was the fifth act on a bill headed by comedian Andy Griffith. And Bitsy's quoted here as saying, but it seemed that every time he was on the stage, it was just encore after encore. I went backstage, he worked for Elvis for 15 years. And then in 1975, he went and saw Elvis perform, him and his wife. And he got to go backstage, and he says, quote, I went backstage, and when I walked out, I said to my wife, Elvis is dying. He looks so much like his mother did just before she died. Now, we've seen this quote before. It's been used in other newspaper articles. And they're using it in other newspaper articles to try to show that Elvis knew that he was going to pass away, or that people knew this was coming, people could see it coming, even though we've looked at other evidence that makes it clear that that's not the case. But here, it's actually just part of this story. This is just something that Bitsy said, something that Bitsy felt, something that was true, but not something that had deeper meaning other than Bitsy himself. He saw something in Elvis that he didn't like, or now that he looks back on it in this moment of shock as Elvis has passed away, he says that was the moment, I should have done something then. And Keith Afredo, welcome Keith. I don't believe I've seen your name in the chat before, so welcome to the channel. He says, what truly bothers me is the gap of time when EP fell to the floor and Ginger Alden actually called downstairs at Graceland. Well, we've looked pretty carefully at that so far, Keith, from the available evidence that's out there at this moment in time, because we're chronologically moving forward to see the evidence as it was presented to the fans in 1977. And at this point, Ginger Alden's name's not really even, it's barely popped up. The belief at this moment is that Joe Esposito found Elvis, and it shifted from he was in his bed to he was on the floor of the bedroom to he was on the bathroom floor. And whether he was on his face or on his back has shifted. It's been all very unclear. So that Joyce has all this in her notebook at this point, but she's not, our fictional fan Joyce who we're following. She's keeping a notebook. I'm going to show that notebook in a very soon upcoming episode so that we can all catch back up to where we are in the investigation. But that is going to come up, and we are going to look more carefully at that. And I do have some very interesting pieces that I think you, Keith, would be very interested in, because they will indicate that a lot of the things that were said were not true. At least a lot of the things about Ginger. And Wanda says, company just pulled up, so she's got to leave the live. I hope to see you back on another one, Wanda. I try to do every day at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And Keith saying that also Charlie Hodge stated that Elvis had been diagnosed with bone cancer and was in constant pain in his hands. So Keith, if you go back into some earlier episodes, you'll see one that has Dr. Nick. And in that episode, we looked at some prescriptions. And some of those prescriptions could have been used for bone cancer. So it does seem possible that Charlie either talked to somebody about what some of these scripts might mean, or he discussed them with Dr. Nick. And if you go back into those episodes, you'll see that it was almost impossible to diagnose what was really wrong with Elvis. And they even took a liver biopsy. And the liver doctor, the best specialist in the United States, said nothing's wrong with the man. He's just fat. So he needs to lose some weight. So that's where the medical community was at that moment. So the fact that Charlie believed that he had bone cancer, I think is totally believable. But we haven't got there yet. We will get to where Charlie says that. But at this point in the timeline, he hasn't said it. So I hope you stick with us. And Pat says, Matt, isn't it true that Elvis used to go into the bathroom to read? In that bathroom, so that everyone understands, it's not a bathroom like we think of it. It's an entire bedroom. It was a second bedroom that was upstairs that Elvis had combined with the bathroom that was up there, and then opened into his room so that he could use the entire thing as a dressing room. And he had a very nice chair that he really liked in there that he used to get his hair done in. And that's the chair he liked to sit in to read. All right, let's move back to this article that I'm looking through with Bitsy Mott. And so we've seen that Bitsy has made this very emotional story that he had seen Elvis a couple of years before, and he thought at the time that Elvis was dying. I think this is a very understandable emotional reaction at the moment. And then he said that he'd been in a fog ever since he heard the news of Elvis's passing. So I think that just adds right in. He's been in a fog, and he's been reliving and remembering all these different moments that he spent with Elvis, especially that last one. And then another quote from Bitsy, I saw him all kinds of ways, and there was nothing that I ever saw or heard that would be detrimental to that boy. So Bitsy's telling us that when he spent time with Elvis, Elvis was a gentleman. Elvis did good things. He was a good person. And that Bitsy recognized that in him. That I never saw or heard nothing that would be detrimental to that boy. And then Bitsy described what he did for Elvis, which was he arranged travel between cities and security for the star. He screened Presley's phone calls, and he handled any personal problems that might occur on the road. And those personal problems were most often jealous husbands or boyfriends that would appear and wish to possibly harm Elvis. The other most common problem was teenage females that wanted to touch Elvis in some manner, that they wanted to get in and see him at any cost. So that's a lot of what Bitsy dealt with. And then Bitsy says, I remember one time we were flying from Texas to one of our one-nighters, and the pilot got lost in this plane we chartered. I was riding co-pilot, but I couldn't fly. And the pilot said to me, here, you watch the plane while I check this map. Well, Elvis was sitting back there, and for years afterward, he never flew. So Um, I've heard this story told by Gene Smith as well. It's in Gene Smith's book. And I believe that Bitsy's referring to this story about the pilot ran out of gas and had not made sure the fuel tanks were full, and then ran out of gas in the secondary fuel tank. And they had made an emergency landing. And when they got back up into the air, they still had issues because, again, he'd forgotten to fill one of the fuel tanks. And Elvis was put off by this and did not want to fly anymore. And that's why for a long time they took the trains, because Gladys was also terrified of him flying. And he took this as a sign that he shouldn't fly anymore. Now, this could have been a different flight, but between this story and Gene's, we can see why Elvis wasn't a fan of flying, because he started out in the early days when it wasn't quite totally commercial yet, and he did these small chartered flights, and a lot of times that wasn't fun. And then Bitsy also recalled that he played bit parts in 3 Presley movies: Loving You, Wild in the Country, and GI Blues. And then he said, I remember one time Elvis knew I couldn't sing. I was in a group singing thing, and he looked over his shoulder at me and just busted out laughing. They had to reshoot that whole scene. And then Bitsy left in 1972, and he said it was because, quote, I had my own family and wanted to stay at home more. So, you know, Bitsy was older and he wanted to see his kids grow up, and you can't do that on the road. And Elvis really never left the road. Even when he was doing the movies, he was taking a giant road trip 3 times a year from Memphis to Hollywood, and then back from Hollywood to Memphis. So there's really 6 trips, 3 each way. And the distance is so great. And he went with such a large caravan that it was very wearing on any single person. It's amazing Elvis was able to do it, but most of the ones who did this with him, almost none of them made it through every single one of those trips. And then Keith saying, love the show, but don't you think the Colonel would have been involved in these serious health problems? Again, if you go back to the previous shows, it's not clear that Dr. Nick or any of the other doctors understood how serious Elvis's health problems were. He was taking a large quantity of drugs. He very clearly had a lot of pain. He was willing to do a liver biopsy, which is very painful. It was very painful then. So should the Colonel have done more? Well, it's not clear that Dr. Nick knew to do more, or that there was any more that could be done. So I go into a lot of detail about that in some previous ones. So I think you'll be really interested in those. But it is going to cycle back around when we get to more evidence. And we are going to see more prescription bottles. We're going to see more prescriptions. We're going to see more lists of that kind of stuff come out that are verified. But if you go back to those older videos, you'll also see where I show at least one prescription pad that is a forgery that is said to be Dr. Nick's. So there's a lot of real information out there, and there's a lot of false information. But what I'm trying to do here is use only information that's available to us for free over the internet that we can all access and we can all look at, and that is source material, so that we can get away from any one person's perspective. You know, the source material is always what the source material is. So you can make interpretations from the source material, and that's what we normally see in a book or a movie or a film, but we don't get to see what they really base that on most of the time. And when we do, so if you go back and you look like where I looked at the birth certificate, we pull out a lot of information that hasn't necessarily ever been talked about or told to us. And Pat says that I do believe Tom Parker worked Elvis way too much and he was in a lot of stress. And I do agree that Elvis probably worked way too much, and he was definitely in a lot of stress. And Terry says, Anna, mainly in the late afternoons. Oh, and I think that Terry's trying to say when he does his live streams, to try not to clash with other live streams. And Colleen's saying that I saw in an interview with Charlie Hodge a while back, and he said that Dr. Nick told him and Vernon in Vernon's office that Elvis had bone cancer. Yeah, so I think that what Dr. Nick was probably telling them was there's an array of things that could have been wrong with Elvis. And this sounds like something that he may have said while he was alive. Because obviously, once they'd done the autopsy, they would have come out and said he had bone cancer. I mean, they could have found that in the autopsy if they'd wanted to, especially if Dr. Nick had suspected it. But what they really found was the coronary artery disease. And between the enlarged heart and the coronary artery disease, I mean, that's really the recipe for a heart attack, which in this case was an irregular heartbeat. But a heart attack isn't just the ceasing of the beating of the heart. It could also be an irregular heartbeat. It's like a family name. Heart attack means these things that happen to the heart that cause you to die, and these are heart attacks. And, you know, so heart attack isn't really a scientific name. And that's where a lot of this distinction with the press comes in. You know, the press and the journalists like to use certain words because they're very emotionally driven and they drive sales, but they're not the technical terms. And Dr. Nick and Dr. Francisco are very kind of stuck in the technical terms, and they are not very forceful about really defining the definitions of any of the terms. So, and of course, I don't know that it would have made any difference if they had, because the journalists that we saw went out and reported whatever they wanted to report anyway. And then a Honolulu Elvis fan, thank you so much for coming back. I appreciate you being here. And Charlie said the same in one of his shows after Elvis died. Yeah, and I've seen that video of that show, so I absolutely agree with that. And I think maybe that is what Charlie thought, and that he, he loved Elvis very much, and he lost his home when all this happened. I don't think he had to move out of Graceland. I don't think Vernon forced him out, but I think he knew it was time. He had to go, and he couldn't stay anymore. And that had really been, I think, the only home Charlie had known in his adult life. Certainly the only stable home. And he had watched every single person in it that really meant anything to him disappear, with the exception of possibly Vernon, who I don't think he was really close to, Minnie Mae, who I also don't believe he was close to, or Delta, who I don't believe he was close to. But the guys had all moved in and out one by one. And, you know, by the end, he was basically living by himself in the basement. And I'm sure he would have gone on that way forever and been very happy. But with Elvis gone, you know, he had to move on and live his own life elsewhere. And Colleen says, do you think that Dr. Nick would have told people Elvis's personal medical business without Elvis's permission? So you're probably asking, is Dr. Nick sitting in an office with Vernon and Charlie and discussing Elvis's personal business out of turn? So, yeah, maybe, but at the same time, Vernon's sitting in there, and no one's more on Elvis's side than Vernon. And that may indicate how close Charlie was to Vernon. So, you know, when Elvis went off to leave in 1960 after he got back from the army, and he left to go to Hollywood, Charlie had no plans to go with him. He had not asked Charlie. Charlie was going to stay at Graceland for a few more days and figure out what he was going to do. And Elvis had basically told him to stay as long as he wanted to, and he was going to ride back from the train station with Vernon. So, and Vernon had known Charlie the entire time they were in Germany. So him and Vernon went way back. It's not like they just met each other. And of all the guys that hung around with Elvis, I'm sure Vernon might have seen him as the most possibly professionally important, because he was up there on the stage. If people make fun of him being on the stage and what he did, he was very important, as we saw through that last note. He's the one that communicated between Elvis and the orchestra and the band, and he kept them all in sync. And when Elvis switched it up on stage suddenly, Charlie had already planned for those events with all of these other people, and they smoothly switched from song to song. That's how they kept up. And it's not like they could have just played these songs. They did a couple of times, but usually you had to have had an arrangement. And in the old days, like Glenn Hardin would write those arrangements. I don't know who was doing them at the end. But when Charlie gets the note, make sure you get these. That's what it's telling him. Make sure you've communicated this to the band and to the orchestra, and that you've had the arrangements done so that we can perform these songs. And then Keith is saying Billy Smith, Elvis Presley's cousin, had said in the early morning of August 16th, 1977, Elvis showed no signs of being sick and was actively playing racquetball, and even said the ball stung Elvis in the knee. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. You know, what the autopsy shows, and that we don't know in the timeline yet, is that all of his organs are enlarged. And they're enlarged because his heart is enlarged, and it's pumping too much blood to the liver and to other areas. And that's why his liver's enlarged. Even though they take the biopsy and the guy says it's not, it is enlarged, and that's what's causing him a massive amount of pain. You know, so he uses these drugs to get past the pain, and then he's able to do things like play racquetball. So he has taken pain medications on this day. I'm absolutely positive, because he had to have been taking them almost every day since he was 30, because his enlarged colon was of such a size that the medical community now thinks it would have taken from about the age of 30 to 42, about 12 years to get to that point. Could have taken less, could have taken more. But from the moment it started getting bigger, there was pain involved. And that pain increased every day by some amount as the colon got worse and worse. And there was less and less space in his abdomen all the time. So yes, he was able to do those things, but they overtaxed his heart. And he also had the blockage. So it's really the amazing part isn't that he was able to play the racquetball. It's that he was alive to play the racquetball on that day. Like, he was a ticking time bomb in his body. And it's not clear that any of it was due to any drugs. It seems to have been a lot of natural stuff, all kind of combined all at the same time, and had been going on for a long time. So I absolutely believe he was out there playing the racquetball, but we haven't got to anything that Billy Smith said yet. So stay tuned, Keith, because that's going to come up. And Anna says, Terry, even though I'm in the US, I'm able to catch some of the UK live streams, so I'll try to catch yours as well. Thank you, Anna, for supporting the team. And Colleen says, anyone that saw Elvis's last concert could see he was very sick just by looking at him. So let's take a look here for just a second. I'm going to turn off the slideshow. And this is from June, this picture. It's from the day that the letter was dated that Vernon gave away the cufflinks. And that's why I chose this picture. And you can see he's got a TCB ring on and got a great belt buckle, and the designs on this jumpsuit are amazing, and this purple scarf, and he's also wearing a necklace of some kind. This isn't the last concert, and it's not the concert that was filmed for the CBS television special, but it's right in that period. And, I don't know anything about color correcting or all those photographic tricks or whatever, so I don't know how closely the color in this picture resembles the color of the real picture or what your screens do to it once you get it. So there's a lot of things to think about when you look at an image, but to me, he looks very good in this picture with just a slight puffiness to his face, as if he's maybe 10 or 15 pounds overweight, maybe 20. He looks a little heavy down through his torso, and I think his hands look swollen. Now, he was taking a medication we haven't discussed yet that is referenced by Joe Esposito's girlfriend at the time, and she says that later in her life, she takes the same medication. And it's at that point in her life that she realizes that this medication causes you to retain a massive amount of water, and the first thing that happens is your face and hands swell up, and that she had to hide herself away because she felt she looked so bad for, like a year while she was on this medication. And that if people understood that the medication did this. Now, we haven't got to that part of the story yet, so we haven't really gone over it. We haven't been able to review it the way that we like to make sure that that's a true part of the story. But, we know that he was on drugs, and we know that drugs have side effects. And we know that he definitely looked puffy at times. So I think in the later concerts, he looks a lot worse. Maybe puffier, but at the same time, we're looking at those concerts almost entirely through film. And so they were using these massive lights to get that film. And then film develops differently for film cameras than it does for like still shots like this one. And the medium itself distorts our perspective. So even though we think, oh, it's a camera, cameras don't lie. Cameras do lie. They lie by the lens that's on them and the environment that's around them. And film does not see the same way that our eyes see the world. So when we compare two different mediums like this, I think we get closer to what the truth might have been. So when we look at that last CBS television special, oh, he looks so sick. But the people around him all said he didn't. And maybe this picture here is more like what they were seeing. So I don't know any of that for sure. Again, this is a great time for my disclaimer, daily disclaimer. I'm just a guy, just talking into a microphone. I've found things to show to you, and we discuss them together. Everybody gets to make their own opinion. Feel free to keep putting your opinions into the comments, into the chat. Keith, thank you so much for bringing what you're bringing into the conversation today, and all of my regular viewers who are also commenting a lot today about these topics that we're bringing up. I know that everyone's confused about these topics because no one has ever straightened them out. They've been left open as mysteries for the last 50 years. Somebody comes along and says, this is the way it was. And somebody else comes along and says, this is the way it was. But none of what anyone said has ever matched all the facts. And my favorite ones are the ones where I ask, how does this piece of documentation that we know is real and in the time period fit into your theory? And they say, oh, well, that's a forgery. So it's great to think that there's a lot of forgeries and stuff out there and to be suspect of every document, but we also have to show that those documents are forgeries. It's not enough just to say that it is. And we can't ignore evidence that doesn't fit our theories because that's not the truth. We're not getting to the truth that way. So that's what we're trying to do here on the channel, get all the way back to the source material. And Anna's saying that she thinks he looks good too in this picture. And Anna's saying that, yeah, that medication can do lots of things. It has many side effects. And Pat's saying it was just Elvis's face and stomach that was puffy. And Marion's agreeing. So, yeah, I think, I do believe Elvis was, like most middle-aged men and myself, somewhere around 10 to 20 pounds overweight. I may be a little more. I try to say that I'm less than 20 pounds overweight. But he definitely was able to work that off a lot of times. And I believe that as he was aging into his 40s, it was becoming more difficult for him. I think if he hadn't had all the health issues, it would have been so much easier for him. And he also, because of the lack of space in his abdomen, was certainly swollen out just because of those issues. And then he was swollen because of water retention and stuff on top of that. In this picture, I do not believe he is wearing a bulletproof vest. But he had made statements that he sometimes wore bulletproof vests. And it looks in some pictures like he is. Now, he does have a massive shoulder pad thing going on with this jumpsuit. And, you know, I've never really thought about whether those shoulder pads and their accompanying structure, which could move maybe down across the chest and back, maybe they were Kevlar. I don't think so, because Kevlar wasn't really that advanced at the time, but the jumpsuits themselves were somewhat thick, so they're going to add to you as well in the embroidery, and they were very heavy. So, and of course, they say that the cameras add 10 pounds to you. So I think he was fighting a lot. You know, he had an image that he loved, and he wanted to maintain that image, and he had to fight a lot of stuff to try to maintain it. And the journalists were not willing to give him a break of any kind. And then Pat's saying that weren't his fingers swelling, so he had a hard time putting his rings on. Yeah, I don't know about putting them on. I know that he would tape them to try to keep people from taking them off, but I'm sure that he had a large variety of ring sizes because his hands would swell. And if you look at this picture, I'm positive his hands look swollen here. They just look puffy to me. And Anna says it's hard a lot of times to see his blue eyes, and a lot of times they look brown, which I think might be a reflection of his hair, because he would keep it dark like that, or maybe the other lights in the area, or just the shadows, I guess. And Marion's saying that Charlie said he would stretch his fingers because of pain, which if they were getting swollen, I'm sure that was absolutely true. And then Anna's saying, think how often over time his hands were wrapped around a microphone. And think of all the different kinds of microphones he must have used. I mean, the ones in the 50s were far different from these microphones he uses here. And we would look at these today as antiques. So that's just an interesting thought, too. Let's go back. So we've looked at the Bitsy Mott article. This is Barron Hilton. He owned the Hilton, which had previously been the International, and then his corporation had bought it, turned it into the Las Vegas Hilton, and he was very fond of Elvis. Elvis brought him a lot of money, a lot of business, and Colleen's saying, I'm sure all the karate he did didn't help his hands either. That's true. He did break a lot of boards and bricks with his hands over time, so maybe his hands aren't puffy and they're just built up like that. I don't know. Let me find my source material here. Oh, I've lost it. There we go. So this is from a newspaper in Las Vegas. So Joyce's friends, you know, they come through again and they bring in some Las Vegas newspapers that we hadn't gotten to see yet. And Barron Hilton, head of the worldwide hotel chain, had flown into Las Vegas for a late afternoon advertising conference, but he canceled it after word of Elvis's death was flashed at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. So Elvis died, I believe, in the Eastern time zone, and so over where uh, Barron was, it was 12:30 instead of 3:30 or 4:30. I believe they announced it at 4:30. So he issued a statement, part of which said Presley was more than just a great talent. He was a good friend to all of us at the Las Vegas Hilton. And then I've got another guy here. So we can see Elvis here, and we can see this gentleman. This is Henry Lewin. And he's actually the guy who brought Elvis into the international deal to start with. So he was with the International, and then when Hilton bought the hotel, he stayed on with the hotel and became part of the Hilton Corporation. And he was the Hilton's senior vice president at the time that Elvis passed away. And he said that Elvis was an absolute superstar who was also a very simple person. I am going to miss him. It makes me very sad that this could happen. The man had no season. He was unique, and he was magic to our industry. So Henry, Elvis has brought Henry a massive amount of success. Henry's built this last 8 years of his career off of being associated with Elvis, plus the other things he does with the hotel, obviously, but Elvis is that crowning jewel. He's the one that made the deal. He's the one that when Elvis comes back, he's the one he remembers. So it affects him, I believe, more than it does Barron Hilton. And then we get to see a guy that we've talked about several times. But over here in the comments, Marion saying that Elvis even hurt his hands doing fight scenes in the movies. True. Absolutely true. He did hurt his hands doing that. And so did some of the other guys. And Keith saying, how was Elvis going on tour on the next day if he was in bad shape? Well, he wasn't in bad shape. He was a ticking time bomb waiting to fall down, no longer alive. But he was able to go about his daily business. His shape was such that the doctors felt that the only thing that was wrong with him was that he was fat. Now, Dr. Nicopolis believed that he really was feeling pain. But even when you hear the early stuff that Nicopolis says, he kind of felt like Elvis was scamming him for the pills in order to get high. But based on what we know, based on the autopsy, and what we know from medical science today, and if you look at books like Destined to Die Young, the amount of pain that he must have felt on a daily basis, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being massive pain, at the age of 30, started to hover between 1 and 2 all the time. By the age of 42, it was between 3 and 4 all the time, but would spike. If he ate a lot, it would spike. If he didn't take some of his pain medication on a regular basis, it would spike. But he also built up a massive tolerance. So all of these things were going on at the same time. And yeah, he probably was getting high off of it. So there's a lot of things that can be true at the same time, but he wasn't sick enough that the medical community thought he was sick. And this is because there weren't any diagnostic equipment available. Now, we did do a deep dive into that, and there was diagnostic equipment available, but GIs very rarely used it. It was mostly MRIs for your head, for your brain. And they were using CAT scans, but full body CAT scans were also something that was just unheard of. There were a couple of them, but none of the doctors that Elvis dealt with had any experience with them, nor would they have relied on anything that came from them, because these technologies were proving themselves during this period. What they found had to correspond with what people, experts in the field already knew, so that they could make a baseline of this equipment is telling us the right thing. And we weren't there yet in 1977. So hopefully that answers some of that question. But Keith, again, I definitely encourage you to head back and watch some of the old previous live streams. We really do a lot on that, and we get a lot into that. And there's going to be a lot more coming in the future. And Terry's saying that Elvis loved his fans, and he said once, if it wasn't for my fans, I would not be here. And that's true. And Marion saying, did you see Elvis get a award from the Sioux Nation, the Indian or Native American nation, right before a concert? He looked really bad, but gave his best. Yeah, I would agree with that. He was looking pretty tired there. And Pat's agreeing that the fans are the most important. And Colleen says, I don't know how a doctor could say that unless he didn't see him because of the last vacation in Hawaii. You could see his arms and legs were thin. It was the belly and fluids, in my opinion. And so, Colleen, I agree with that as well. And what I would then point to is they were doing diagnostic stuff. They did do the liver biopsy. They just couldn't find anything. And as a person who's gone through a very serious health condition myself, it's appalling how little diagnostic work we can do even today. So, if you are unlucky enough to ever develop cancer, it is very difficult to detect until it's large enough that it's really an issue. Like, if you could detect it when it's really, really new and small, it would be nothing to get rid of. But because a lot of times you have to wait until there's some effect on your body before you realize, oh, wait a second, something's terribly wrong. This thing has already grown into something terrible. So that's even today where we're at with diagnostics. We're much, much better than we were in 77. But they just weren't there. They just weren't there. But could you look at him and say something's wrong? Yeah, and they did. And he was saying something was wrong. So they were seeking a way to find it. And they did go to the best specialist in the world. They sent that liver biopsy to the best liver specialist they could find. And he said, yeah, everything looks fine to me. I think the man's just fat. And then Colleen saying, I was told I had the flu and it was lung cancer. Bingo. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Colleen. Medicine's still an art form, and hopefully you get the best artist that's available, but there's always a new artist. There's always someone who's never experienced healing what it is that you have, or they've got very little experience in it, or it's just a baffling something that, and lung cancer I know is one that's it's difficult to detect, although we do have a much better ability to do so now. But again, it comes down to the art forms of reading the diagnostic materials. So you get these pictures from these images, but when you look at the images, if you're like me, you look at them and you think, is this one of those magic illusion things where I gotta stare at it long enough and then the answer will pop out? Or because I can't see anything when they show me these x-rays and stuff, I can't see the things. So they have trained and they're putting together other knowledge with it, and it just wasn't available for Elvis. And Pat's saying, Colleen, I hope you're doing a lot better. Me too, Pat, or Colleen, I hope you're doing a lot better. And I know there's a lot of us out there that have suffered with different serious medical conditions, or people in our family. So I think that's one of the reasons that, we look to how did Elvis deal with these things? Because he had serious medical conditions. He just didn't know which ones, but he knew he had them. But he's still, on that very last day, out there playing racquetball. He was ready to go to work to support his family and his friends. He was going to take care of all those responsibilities that were on his shoulders. And that's where we're going to leave it today. And when we come back, we'll finish out the Las Vegas story, because we've still got to meet one guy from Las Vegas. And that's going to be one of your favorite guys. It's Dr. Elias Ghanem. And we've seen him before because he's the one that collected all the bottles from Dr. Nicopolis that we saw, but never bothered to tell Dr. Nicopolis that he was also treating Elvis and doing his own prescriptions. But he was aware of what Nicopolis was prescribing. He also got some really nice fancy gifts from Elvis over time, and they had a special relationship. And then he was also kind of a slimy guy, according to a lot of people. So I think it'll be a fun one when we get back to this series. We'll be able to take a look at Dr. Elias Ghanem. That's what's going to be coming up. And Keith is saying that I think Elvis's biggest savior was Larry Geller, his hairdresser, and always told everyone on tour how he looked. So I do agree, Keith, that Larry loved Elvis and Elvis loved Larry. I would never disagree with that. I do have one video on the channel where I review Larry's very first book, which you may not know about because it was within just a couple of years after Elvis passed away. And it's very similar to the things that he says later, which are almost all wonderful and sweet things. But I do have an issue with Larry that I do not believe that Elvis was searching in any spiritual text for anything outside of Christianity. And if you watch the last video in this series that I put up, the one from yesterday, we look at things that Elvis wrote in a spiritual text, not a Christian text, and things that he underlined, that he wrote within the text. And he underlines and writes very Christian ideas, but he seems to ignore, or at least not underline, those ideas which did not align with Christianity. And in my personal theory, and it's only a theory because everybody here can have their own theory, and this is just my opinion, Elvis was looking for a way to take all of his Jewish and non-Assembly of God friends with him to heaven when he passed away, because he was going. There was no doubt, because that's where Gladys was. And he was not going to miss out on Gladys. He was going to be reunited with his mother, whatever that took. And what that took was he must believe in the Assembly of God and what they taught him. And then, hopefully, he'd be able to take everybody else with him, because he knew that he was surrounded with people that he believed were good. And he did not want them to be left behind. And he was looking in all those books for the secrets to make that happen. And Keith is saying, you believe he went to Larry's grounds and walked around. I know he went to, I know a spiritual place and walked around and met the spiritual leader there. I'm terrible with names, unfortunately, and can't remember the names. I believe that's what you're talking about with Larry's grounds. And there's another really interesting connection there, because one of the monks at that place happened to be a guy that he had acted with earlier. So we'll get, maybe one day I'll tell that story. It's a really fascinating story. And Colleen's off to pick up the grandbabies, and I've talked too long because we're past an hour. So I'm going to let you guys all go here and say, until we meet again, everybody keep on taking care of business. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining my live streams and being such a great audience.